Today on Upfront, medical marijuana. Governor Evers wants to take the first steps toward legalization, but Republican lawmakers say not so fast. Might public pressure change their minds? Plus, the call for a red flag law. Attorney General Josh Kaul on what it is and why he says we need it. And first impressions, what new Congressman Bryan Stiles says about the condition of Congress.
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Up Front with Mike Goucher.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Up Front. It barely took a month for a federal judge to strike down early voting limits passed in last month's lame duck legislative session. Republicans had limited early voting to the 2 weeks leading up to the election. But in a new lawsuit brought by the liberal advocacy group One Wisconsin Now, a U.S. district judge said last week that the new law violated injunctions he had previously issued on early voting limits. We're talking about this and more today with Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Kaul. And we should say right off the bat, you've recused yourself from this case, this particular case, but you've been pretty outspoken about voting limits. Do you care to react to what was decided last week?
I'm screened from that case, as you said, based on work that I did prior to becoming Attorney General. So I will leave that topic for others to weigh in on.
This does present the question, though, whether or not the state would, since you've recused yourself, but would the state itself, if Republican lawmakers wanted to pursue this case further legally, would the state be in a position where it would have to represent those lawmakers?
So again, because I'm screened from that case, I'll leave that for others to weigh in on.
Well, let's talk about something else that you may or may not be able to talk about, and this is the notion of what the state's going to do with the Affordable Care Act. We were involved in a lawsuit. I see you smiling about that, so maybe I'll get the same answer. But the state was involved in suing to have Obamacare declared unconstitutional. There's a ruling that basically said that, but the law is still in effect for now. What is the current situation? Can you give us a status report? Has the governor indicated to you what he wants you to do next in terms of changing the state's position?
So the district court in that case issued a ruling that, in the district court's opinion, that the law was unconstitutional. That is now on appeal. That's sort of the status of the litigation. In terms of what Wisconsin's role is going to be going forward, that's something that I'll wait to address later once we've made a more public statement about what we're doing. But generally speaking, the role of the Department of Justice in this case and in all other cases is to live up to our obligations and to follow the law.
You have some challenges on that front. Even in the last week, Planned Parenthood said it was going to ask the judge to strike down some laws that limit nurses from performing abortions, that make it more difficult for women to get medications that induce abortions. You said during the campaign you were going to follow state law, that you would defend state laws. That's state law. Are you going to defend that?
So generally speaking, again, I'm not going to comment on the specifics of that case, but generally speaking, the role of the Attorney General's office is to defend state laws as long as there's a reasonably defensible basis to do so. The AG's office also defends state officials in a number of cases.
Do you have any reaction to the fact that state lawmakers said last week that they may hire private attorneys at taxpayer expense to defend themselves against a lawsuit challenging the lame duck legislation?
In that particular case, again, I'm not going to weigh in on it, but I can tell you that in general, there are certain circumstances in which intervention might make sense for the legislature. But one of the things that the extraordinary session legislation did was it gave the legislature a right to intervene in virtually any case that impacts the interests of the legislature. That I don't think is in the interests of taxpayers, because to the extent that we are, in the typical case, the Department of Justice is going to be representing the state. There's no reason to have an extra legal team being paid for by taxpayers in most cases.
Let's talk about the red flag law. This is something you have talked about, and I want people, our viewers, to understand exactly what you're talking about. You're a proponent of this type of legislation. A number of states are doing this. What exactly is a red flag law? And then we'll talk a little bit more about that.
It's a law that would allow law enforcement or a family member to go to a judge when there's a clear danger, a clear threat that's being presented by somebody, either to themselves or to others, and to get an order that would temporarily disarm that person. Once the danger is abated, then that person would be able to to go to the court and get their rights restored. But this would allow for a temporary procedure, if there's an emergency situation, for law enforcement to be able to make sure that somebody who is dangerous doesn't have access to the firearms that they possess.
You've heard the arguments against this, that it's unconstitutional. Some people say that it's overly broad, that it denies a person due process. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, I believe there are 13 states that have these laws now. As far as I know, that they're in effect everywhere. They haven't been struck down. So from a constitutional standpoint, they've held up so far, at least. But also, I think we should have a careful process here, because I support Second Amendment rights. I want people who have the right to bear arms, who are not a threat to others, responsible gun owners, to be able to exercise those rights. This is totally consistent with that, because this would be a process where you go to a judge, there is due process, and it would be a temporary order. Once the person's firearms were, once the person was disarmed, that person could go to the judge and make their case. There is a process in place. But this is, something that I think we need in this environment we're in right now, where, last full school year, over 4 million kids went through lockdowns in their schools. We've had far too many school shootings. We need to make our schools as safe as we possibly can. And one of the ways we can do that is that if somebody makes some sort of threat, this gives law enforcement a tool to disarm that person.
You've also said in the last week that you would support the legalization of marijuana, and you even drew this analogy that perhaps medical marijuana would be better than the use of opioids in treating certain afflictions. Do we need another legal drug in the state of Wisconsin? We have problems with opioid overdoses. We have problems with drunk driving. Do we need another legal drug?
Yeah, so I would clarify that, first of all. I support legalizing medical marijuana. I think we should move forward on that.
Not recreational?
Now. Well, what I would like to do is legalize medical marijuana and see how that goes. I would like the state to sort of take stock, have some experience with that, and see if that's something that's working for Wisconsin. There are 3 big reasons I think we should do that. One is there are people who face serious issues with pain and I think would benefit from having access to medical marijuana. 2, which you touched on, is some people who face serious issues with pain right now are getting prescribed opioids, who I think potentially could benefit from medical marijuana as well. And if a doctor has a choice there, I think it's very clear that medical marijuana is safer than opioids, given this overdose epidemic that we have with opioids. And then 3rd, this is potentially a very good source of revenue for the state. And I would rather see that revenue coming in and being used to fund enforcement efforts and prevention efforts and treatment efforts, rather than just ignoring that as we are now.
So medical marijuana is something you're definitely supportive of, and recreational is something you look at maybe at another time?
That's right. I think if Wisconsin moves forward with medical, we could then assess, is this having an impact on safety on our roads? Is this something that's being used responsibly? Are there dispensaries that are being responsible? That sort of thing.
Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul, always good to have you on the program. Thanks very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, the president and the speaker in a tit-for-tat over the government shutdown. I'll be asking Republican Congressman Brian Stile how long this shutdown can go on. And later, medical marijuana in Wisconsin. We were just talking about it. The governor wants to go for it. What's standing in the way?
Up Front with Mike Goucher, brought to you by the American Transmission Company.